Four, three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of The Art of Move with myself, Anthony Manuel, my good friend, Dr. William Raybar. We're out here in the Canadian Rockies, still trying to find the grand unified theory of human movement and biomechanics and functional training, all that fun stuff. We're joined today by Benjamin Pelton, who is a personal development and human performance coach with over 25 years in athletics, over 10 years into his coaching business, which focuses on transforming people's minds and bodies. His deep curiosity for mechanics and physics, not just of the body, led him to academic studies in both philosophy and mechanical engineering. Then, through years of finding the most innovative ways to serve his clients, he's been introduced to multiple elite accreditations and mentors, including Wim Hof from the Wim Hof Method, like the Iceman. Scott Sonnon, I think is how you pronounce Sonnon.
Sonnon,
The
yeah, Scott
yeah
Sonnon.
the creator of TACFIT, and Coach Gil, who we just interviewed from GOATA, among many more, combining the knowledge he's gathered and the experience of implementation. The information that he offers is called the Pelton Plan, and everyone needs a plan for managing their mindset, their emotion, their stress, and their sustenance, and that's what the Pelton Plan does. That's what you do. So that's the introduction you sent to me. Why don't you tell us from the horse's mouth and not just from a written bio that I got to read straight off my computer, who you are, what you're all about, what you're passionate about, how you got into this whole game?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that introduction. Glad to be here. So grateful to be here, actually. I think this is really amazing what you two are doing by bringing in the different heads of the fitness industry, the wellness industry, and trying to develop conversations so that we all can develop together and grow. So thank you very much for having me. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Miami, Florida, which is an athletic city. There's all sorts of sports teams here. So
Mm.
I grew up playing sports. I was a high school All-American in lacrosse, and then I went to college to play lacrosse at Florida State University. From there, I just was into coaching. I was coaching middle school and then JV and then varsity and then collegiate athletes in lacrosse. And then from there, I realized that I just enjoy teaching and helping others. So I decided that I would become a personal trainer. And then from there, I was using what you can say is the conventional approach to training people, barbell, bodybuilding.
Mhm.
And at the time, I was going through my own issues from, I guess, my own training practices where I developed lower back pain, and so from there, I just got sucked into learning a lot about physical therapy and other alternatives to health and wellness. And so, yeah, I use those practices now to help my clients feel better and also myself feel better. So,
Okay, so could you take us through your training history? You started with weights, and then you were telling me you had an opportunity to go to a lot of seminars. Could you tell us about that and how that went, and what your mindset was at each?
yeah, great question. So in 2002, at the age of 12, my father brought me into the weight room at my high school and decided to give me the opportunity to lift weights and go through that conventional barbell lifting program. I got very strong lifting weights, but during that training in high school, I started to pull my hip flexor. I tore my hamstring actually in my junior year in high school, and so I already had a background in injuries that I think looking back reflectively is a result of the training that I was doing. But as I started graduating college with a degree in philosophy and committing to being a trainer, I started becoming focused in alleviating my lower back pain that I was having. I was having severe episodic low back pain and really was unaware of why that was happening. And then the internet gave me some gifts. And that's when I found someone named Chris Duffin from Kabuki Movement System. He's like one of the lightest guys to lift 1,000 pounds, just an absolute monster. But what he was teaching was warm ups for your squatting pattern and how to do different patterns to warm up your technique so that you can lift heavy weights and not feel pain. So I started using some of those techniques and it really actually started to alleviate the pain in my lower back. So I was interested in what information Chris was aware of, and that was dynamic neuromuscular stabilization, the DNS protocols. And so I started researching seminars on DNS, and one of the clients that I currently had at that time in 2015 is the owner of Carnival Cruise Line, so a very financially stable person. And this individual has a nonprofit called Living Web Farms, and they do farming and holistic lifestyle education on YouTube that's available on how to operate a farm, how to grow your own food, how to raise chickens, cattle, anything that has to do with sustainable living off the land. You can find that at Living Web Farms. And so they hired me to be the wellness director for the farm. And with that came a lot of funding for my education. And so, right away, DNS to me seemed like a very impactful course to take, and I wasn't sure really about it. So I went to that course with a very open mind. I had a National Academy of Sports Medicine, NASM, certified personal training, and a corrective exercise cert from them. So I was, kind of aware of a very basic therapeutic approach to posture through their NASM certification. And then I went to DNS. And this course was amazing. Some of the first slides they had was like a huge bodybuilder and then a little ballet dancer on the same slide. And, I was the big bodybuilder in that class. That was 215 swole. And, everyone was kind of looking at me as the example of like this hyper developed individual that I was suffering from lower back pain. So as the class went on, one of the first things that they had was bring me up as an example of rib flare, and let's see if we can get him to breathe into his stomach. And so when they asked me to breathe down into my waistband, I had no proprioception of where that was. Like they literally had their hands into my pelvis, pushing for feedback, and I couldn't connect to my breath to feel how to fill into my core. And I'll never forget that moment when I felt the breath connect into the belly. And that was it. I had finally connected to my diaphragm on how to breathe deeper. And that was it. They were like, listen, you need to practice breathing into your core. You need to build that proprioception into the diaphragm and reposition your rib cage so that you're alleviating that lower back pain. In that course, they talked about herniated discs and how that putting your spine in a more neutral position and creating that intra-abdominal pressure in the core with aligning the pelvis and the rib cage can help alleviate that bulging disc. And so that blew my mind. And then on top of that, they go into the functions of the diaphragm and how that can work for stability of the core, the rib cage, and also closing the sphincter of the stomach. Is that all new information to me? I was just studying NASM, studying bodybuilding.com, studying forums, and no one's talking about the diaphragm and how that can alleviate lower back pain. So to me, this was like a whole eye-opening position, information that I was so grateful that I had this opportunity and funding to go learn about. So that was really the introduction. And as far as like continuing on with that, since then I continued to go to different courses like FMS 1 and 2, Dr. Andrea Spina's FRC and Kinstrike class I did as well, in early February 2016. Then I completed the DNS track for exercise trainer. I did their 1 and 2. And then from there, I got into Craig Levinson's work from Prog School, which is, again, mostly DNS material and how that applies to athletic performance. And then I even got into Stu McGill's work, 1 and 2, learned his 3-hour assessment. And then, I just went to these courses with a very open mind. I realized that I didn't know anything. It was like one of those things, like in philosophy, they talk about it. Like it's all about being open-minded and the idea that you really don't know anything and that you should just be skeptical and be willing to listen and debate and discuss what is important and maybe what's not important. And so, I was just mind blown about how much work had been done into studying the body. And most importantly for me, it was like, okay, now how can I alleviate my lower back pain? Part of this was helping myself, gathering the information for the owner of the nonprofit, but also helping myself feel better and applying it so that I could apply it to others, right? Like I think I heard you say, Dr. William, that you like to try things out first before you like to use them with your patients. And I'm the same way too. I want to make sure that I fully grasp the feelings and the sensations that these movements are supposed to bring about, and then, you know, see the results of that. And then, okay, now I understand this. I understand the reactions that they're going to implement. Let me go ahead and show this to my clients. So yeah, and then as I was going through this rehab stuff, learning all about the spine and a lot of bracing the core stuff, and the diaphragm, I got into Wim Hof. There was a Tim Ferriss podcast someone shared with Wim Hof, and I was just blown away by this guy. Growing up in Miami, Florida, you know, we don't like the cold. I know you guys are on the opposite spectrum, but yeah, it's not really a big thing down here. So I was amazed that a human being was capable of doing what he did. As an athlete, I realized that myself as an athlete had more potential to use his practice as like a performance enhancing tool. So yeah, I took it on as a challenge, and then I also did a course, or I did a seminar, and Jim Quick from Quick Learning was there.
Oh yeah.
He's like the memory guy and the quick reading guy. And you know, one of the important things he said is, if you want to learn something, teach it, because when you teach it, you have to learn it twice. And so that to me has always stuck with me, which is that, you know, when you have to teach the material, whatever it is, you have to really understand what it is you're talking about, or the skeptical guy will kind of peel out that you don't really know what you know. So it's important that you actually embody the information. And so a lot of these courses that I've taken, I've just gone ahead without even looking further into it, just sign up for the instructor path. Because when I went through those instructor routes, you learn so much more than this like very basic fundamental stuff that they present to the layman. And it's like, no, we all have this capacity to be an instructor. It's a matter of whether or not you want to implement it. But as far as the way that they teach you to be an instructor, you get such a deeper understanding of the material. So right away, like all these courses that I took, even though like some of them I didn't actually implement with my clients directly, it was just the level of information that I got as going through the instructor track was worth it so much more than I think doing it another way. Yeah, that was a mouthful.
Yeah, that's like an epic journey that you went on. And I love that you specifically chose the approach of getting the instructor paths, because one of I think both Will and I are big fans of self-education. We like to experiment. We like to learn through experience and trial and error, and kind of get the depths of it by trying to figure out ourselves. But I've also noticed that like the sooner that you get to a point where you can teach it to someone else, and this like that is like, I love the analogy of like you learn it twice, because in my experience, I learned more about training through coaching other people as a personal trainer, because I would have people who had issues that I didn't have. And I always thought it's like, oh, my own practice is my ultimate teaching tool, because I'm in my body and I'm experiencing it. But it was actually solving problems for other people who had completely different issues that I had ever had, that really taught me a lot and even informed my own practice on a deeper level. For people who don't know about Wim Hof and his method, what would you say from the perspective of an instructor? What is the goal and the orientation around doing the Wim Hof method?
Nice. I think the main goal is gaining control of your body and your mind. So interoception is your awareness of what's going on inside, your emotional state, your physical state. And through the breath, you're able to really regulate how you're feeling internally. So when you get into the extreme cold, your body has a fight or flight response, and your breath will mirror your internal state when you're in that fight or flight environment. So the Wim Hof method is a great tool for lowering inflammation and also training de-escalation from stress.
I noticed you took the oxygen advantage coaching as well, or I think I heard that somewhere on a podcast.
I haven't had the opportunity to go through Patrick McCowan's instructor course, but I've read all his books and his recent book as well. The idea with that is you're going to opt to use nasal breathing as your one and only source of inhalation and exhalation. And then as you get into your performance training, you're still going to manage that nasal breathing. And then once you go into all the science and nuances of nasal breathing, then you can get the idea of what an oxygen advantage trainer is about. It's pretty basic. It's rehab your nose so you can be a nasal breather. You also want to lower your breath rate so that you're breathing less per minute, and that's going to increase your CO2 saturation. Really, oxygen advantage is about learning about your relationship to carbon dioxide and how to increase your tolerance to CO2, and then you will get all the health benefits that come from having higher levels of CO2 in your blood. But it's really just basic. Use your nose and develop a tolerance to CO2.
So how do you reconcile that with Wim Hof, since they seem to be opposites, where you're bringing the sympathetic nervous system in with Wim Hof and then parasympathetic in with oxygen advantage?
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's something that we have been dealing with since the beginning of becoming an instructor of the Wim Hof Method. Is like, how do we reconcile these two opposing approaches to breath work, right? And I think the simple answer is that when you're not trying to use the Wim Hof Method, you should use the oxygen advantage method as far as your daily activities, performance training, everything you're doing. You're breathing in and out of the nose with control. The exhalation is where you find that parasympathetic moment is on the exhalation. So even in the Wim Hof method, even though you're hyperventilating, your exhale neurologically is your parasympathetic moment. And then on your inhale, you're actually creating an excitement and a sympathetic moment. And so we're actually just constantly going back and forth through these moments of parasympathetic and sympathetic. Obviously, when we're in our waking state, even we're sympathetic, right? We're awake and we're processing and doing things. And then as we slow ourselves down and maybe even go into eating, right? Your body's going to have to become parasympathetic to shift the blood flow. I did do some Thomas Myers work as well. I took a Thomas Myers class in Florida with him, and he has a really great explanation of the blood flow changes from sympathetic to parasympathetic. So it's really a regulation of blood flow that's going to adjust the nervous system and where your blood flow is going. So if it's more in your gut and it's extracting nutrients from the intestinal line, then you're in a parasympathetic state. Does that mean that you couldn't go and run and attack something? No, you could do that, but it's your blood would then have to go back towards your limbs and fill up your limbs so that you can be more parasympathetic. Or sympathetic. And so to go back to the thing between the oxygen advantage and Wim Hof method, right, is you're always going to be doing the LSD breathing, which is the light, slow, deep breath work. And that's, again, changing the chemistry of the blood so that you have a higher CO2 saturation, which creates more blood flow and better performance for your utilization of oxygen. But if your goal, like if you're suffering from an autoimmune disease, like Crohn's or what was it, axial spondylitis arthritis or something like that, spondyloarthritis, these diseases of the body attacking itself, if you go into the hyperventilation and you release that adrenaline, that's an anti-inflammatory response and also lowers the pro-inflammatory markers. So, using the Wim Hof method as a therapeutic tool is what it's really designed for. But as far as like your daily routine of breath work, you're going to be using oxygen advantage and practice the LSD, light, slow, and deep breathing.
Very cool. What's your current practice in terms of movement and breath work? What do you do on a daily or weekly basis at this point in your life? With everything that you know, like what's your practice?
Yeah, that's a great question. In the past, I used to do an hour of breath work every morning of Wim Hof Method. Currently, I'm teaching breath work during the week. twice a week. So I actually am doing the hyperventilation breathing while I'm coaching the breathing. So that's kind of like my designated time for Wim Hof style breathing. In the beginning of the pandemic, James Nestor came out with a book called Breathe, and he really goes into the oxygen advantage protocols and slowing down your breathing and being a breather. So as of right now, during the week, I'm just constantly focused on relaxed breathing, really nasal breathing. I did the whole tape my mouth thing for a while, and so I recovered my nasal breathing capacity. And then as far as training goes, I do GOATA in the morning. I do a 30-minute GOATA flow that I've kind of put together of these different movements, these fractals of movements that I find very important. And I do 2 rounds of that. And then I go into jujitsu and I do 2 hours in the middle of the day, and then I do another hour in the evening of jujitsu. So I'm doing a lot of physical movement through jujitsu. And then I'm recoding myself with the GOATA stuff. And then as you're learning too through GOATA, you can constantly be recoding. You can constantly be in the mathematics of GOATA. And so throughout my day, my clients kind of joke with me because they're like, wow, you're just constantly working out. And it's true because while I'm there coaching and educating the movements, I'm actually doing the movements with them. And so, yeah, I just have at this point kind of created a routine that flows with my schedule that allows me a little bit of GOATA in the morning, breathwork in the evening and morning on Tuesday and Thursday. I'm doing ice baths every other weekend with my cryo club that I have down here in Miami. And I do sauna work right now because I'm in an apartment. I just moved into an apartment 5 months ago, and I can't have my chest freezer currently where I'm living. So I've kind of had to change my training. And so I have a sauna, one of those therasaunas that you sit in with the zipper. And I've been doing after my jiu-jitsu training at 1:30, after the 2-hour window, I'll go before lunch and I'll hit a 30-minute sauna at 170 after the jiu-jitsu. And then I'll go into my lunch and then back into training again in the afternoon. So I'm just trying to mix in everything I can. Yeah.
Do you find that having a really intense martial arts practice like jujitsu, grappling specifically, because obviously jujitsu, we've actually had quite a few listeners write into my DMs asking, would you add in conventional stretching and loaded mobility work for a sport like jujitsu, even though you advocate for gait-oriented stuff? And so I wanted to kind of ask you about this as someone who practices GOATA on a regular basis. What are the things that you find about jujitsu that impact your gait mechanics or the patterns that would impact being in the math, quote unquote? Like, do you need to program your recode work in a different way because you do jujitsu specifically? And then do you think it's okay to do things like stretching, or is it even necessary?
Great questions. I think for someone that hasn't had a background in athletics and that wants to start jiu-jitsu training, going into stuff like functional range conditioning could be beneficial for gaining new ranges of motion in the joints. But when I started jiu-jitsu 4 years ago, I decided that I was going to discontinue all weightlifting and all their training so that I could actually allow my nervous system to adapt to the exact inputs of jiu-jitsu. At the time before jiu-jitsu, I was a part of a program called TACFIT with Scott Sonnon. TACFIT is one of the originators of the club bell. So I know David Weck has the RMT club bell, but I don't have the answer to this, but his club bell has the ball with the BBs in it, right? So you can move it around. Well, why is that design different from the normal club bell? I know he has some reasoning behind that, but as far as patents go, Scott Sonnon is the first person to patent the design of the club bell in the United States. So I don't know what Weck's knowledge about Scott Sonnon is. I'm pretty sure he probably knows who Scott Sonnon is, but Scott Sonnon created a whole program called Circular Strength Training, and it was a whole system for using club bells. And then he evolved that into another program called TACFIT. which includes the kettlebell, the med ball, the parallettes, the rings, the club bell, the sandbag, like every technical functional piece of equipment that you could use, he's incorporated that into his full body workout. And TACFIT is really designed for law enforcement, military, and EMS firefighters, and how to keep them functional in the field, right? Because there's a lot of wear and tear on their bodies. So it's like, how do we keep them in the field without getting injured? So his whole program is called like Health First Training. And that guy blew my mind because he incorporates breathwork into his training protocol. You know, he has a warm up in the beginning of the training. You do the intense training, and then you do a cool down movements, and then finish with a deregulation of the breath work, or down regulation of the breath work. So, you know, I had that information before I went into jiu-jitsu, and I believe that program prepared me heavily for the grappling requirements and mobility, because he has like 3 levels of his training. He has the circular strength training. That's like the big brother. Then the medium brother is the TACFIT, and then the little brother is called FlowFit. And FlowFit was like a up-pace yoga class because it had like yoga movements, but it also had grappling movements in it. And the idea was all based around Thomas Meyer's myofascia connections and how you wring out the connective tissue and how you let the fluid come back into it. And so I already had that knowledge of how to kind of open up the body and get mobility before I joined jiu-jitsu. So, you know, like, what would I do now with someone? Essentially, I just put them through the jiu-jitsu movements. You know, I had a kid come in. He's been with me for 8 months. He's 21. The kid's a monster. He's 6'4", 220, or what? He was like 250. The guy's lost 45 pounds with me doing just jiu-jitsu training. Now he's doing 5 hours a week with me, but he couldn't even get down into like a side lunge kind of position to do a knee on belly on the guy on the ground, because he just didn't have the mobility to do it. So I have a few reasons, like ideas of why that is, but one of the other things he was suffering from was cramps. So I put him through these movements and he would start cramping up. And I'm a huge advocate for magnesium. I've been using magnesium religiously for 10 years. And the magnesium, to me, as I think, allows my body to have the massive amount of flexibility that it does. I've always been flexible, always been mobile, but I believe shifting into jiu-jitsu and seeing how my body continues to be very flexible and very like movable, I believe it's the amount of minerals that I consume that allows my tissue to relax and open and stretch. And so I got this guy on the magnesium, boom, cramps gone. Then he just continues to do the movements, and now he's doing stuff that he couldn't do before. So to me, it's more of like being incremental with the training, being patient, and being consistent, that the body will adapt. I know you guys are harping on how the body adapts to what you put into it. So even with jiu-jitsu, it's like, do you need to spend time stretching? Probably not. You know, it's more likely to just show up to class, go through the movements, and allow your body the time to adapt to the needs and requirements of the tissue.
Right.
So you mentioned that during jiu-jitsu, you only do the jiu-jitsu moves. So where does the GOATA moves come into that? What are the most applicable aspects of GOATA to jiu-jitsu? And I know there's a lot of nagging injuries in BJJ. So is GOATA more of a recode thing for you, or do you find applicability on the ground with GOATA?
Yeah. For me, I use GOATA with my guys in the warm-ups. You know, as we're doing our typical jiu-jitsu warm-ups that you see at most gyms, the hip escapes and forward rolls and backwards rolls and all those, I'll set my guys up on the line and we'll do a set of drop-ins. So for time, we're just hitting drop-ins, making sure we're loading up that hip, making sure we're hitting that glute complex and just loading. And then after we've done all that, I get them on the floor. We're doing rockers. Okay, so we're setting up in our 45. Stasia sitting, and we're just pumping out rockers, and then we're doing corner rockers, and then some of the pigeon tracers. And then after that, you know, that's all I implement as far as exact GOATA exercises into our jiu-jitsu training. And then, yeah, unfortunately, jiu-jitsu is very WOTA. You know, I've spent time discussing this with Coach Eric Tessie as far as, you know, what does jiu-jitsu really look like? And if you look at jiu-jitsu bodies, they turn out to be really WOTA. You know, their arches collapse in, their feet are turned out. They do have bow legs because they're wrapping their legs around people's bodies in the closed guard. But for the most part, everyone's feet are flat and their feet are turned out. So for me, it's just been a matter of doing GOATA outside of jiu-jitsu, because jiu-jitsu is jiu-jitsu to me. Like, if I'm going to go fight someone and by the end of the fight, I'm more WOTA, then there's nothing I can do in between that that's going to prevent that, you know, because I'm not focused on anything other than jiu-jitsu. Then once I get off the mat, then it's back into the mat, back into walking on the green dot, back into being on that outside edge so that I can recode the quote damages or decoding from the sport.
So you mentioned magnesium and taking minerals specifically to help your tissues relax and to access these. And it's funny because I started taking magnesium recently too, because I was dealing with some cramps and I just hadn't been getting much from my diet. I remember hearing Ido Portal actually talk about magnesium, and he said anything other than a magnesium chelate, so a chelated form of magnesium, you shouldn't take because basically your body doesn't use it. Is there a certain form of magnesium that you will only take, and do you think that some forms of magnesium are just trash and you should avoid?
Yes, totally agree with that. The chelate is actually a binder, right? So it has to bind to the mineral to stabilize it as you digest it. The problem is when it's bound, it stays bound and doesn't unbind so that you can actually utilize the magnesium in your gut. So that's why most magnesiums end up just working as a laxative, because the magnesium stays inside the lining of the intestines and it's a relaxer. So it's going to relax the walls of your intestines and it's going to relax itself all the way out. And that's why some doctors prescribe magnesium as a way to help you with constipation, because they know it's going to clear you out. But that's not what magnesium is for. That is not the purpose of magnesium. What I take is a magnesium chloride, but this is a special magnesium. The creator of it is Dr. Carolyn Dean. She is a beast, and she has written a book called The Magnesium Miracle, and she's written like 40 other books, and she is just a workhorse when it comes to health and wellness. And so what she's done is she's designed the mineral ion in a stabilized form. So the ions go through the ion channels of the cells, and that's what makes the mitochondria and the entire body enzymatic processes occur, is from the ions going inside the cell. So 2011, Dr. Dean came out with something called Remag, and you know, the universe provided me Dr. Dean for all sorts of reasons, but she has been life-saving for me, life-saving. And she's over the last 10 years released an entire line of mineral ions. And this is so cool because you're like, okay, the ions, right? That's literally like the tiniest particle of these minerals that are the electrical energy signal that goes into the cell that stimulates everything inside of it, right? So the ions is why we eat food. You know, when you're eating your meal, your body's breaking it all down to get it into the ion. And that's what she stabilized into a liquid. And, you know, it's like, oh, is that really real? They shot it with the spectrometer, a laser machine that shoots through things to determine the particle size of things and fluids. And it came up empty. There was nothing to be found in this magnesium solution. And so the people that conducted the experiment were like, whoa, that's never happened before. There must be a problem. So let's do it again. So they did it again. And guess what? It came back with 0 particles inside this solution. And they're like, that's strange. Let's do it again. So they did this experiment 3 times and it all came back with the same result, which is that the fluid is so, the pico-ionic. So pico is e to the negative 12. It's tiny, tiny. And that's what's this liquid solution. So they've done now some preliminary labs with this stuff. And within 2 to 3 hours, you're going to have increased ionized mineral markers from this product. So over the last 10 years, I've been experimenting with giving it to people, and their responses to it are ridiculous. I mean, just it's so cool to see how people calm down and change and energetically adjust to this magnesium. But, you know, for COVID, she came out with a zinc and a silver ion, which just wrecks viruses, because your cells can't have viruses in them when you have zinc inside them. So the thing is no one can get them into the smallest form. You know, when your gut is trying to break down that powder, imagine a salt crystal, right? A salt is a crystal. That crystal has to break down so that you can get to the electromagnetic material, the ions of that crystal. She's already done that. It's already in a liquid form. So the way I look at it is like a liquid crystal fluid of this electromagnetic energy of that specific mineral. So yeah, the magnesium is super important, and the type you take is super important, but she's literally changing the game when it comes to the minerals, because she's got them stabilized in the ionic form. And people's brains, they can't really understand the ions, but I got my minor in physics, so I had to take quantum mechanics. I had to study these subatomic particles so that I can understand and get that degree in philosophy and engineering. But so I kind of had a background to understanding these small things, right? These subatomic particles. And so when she released this magnesium, I was like, holy shit, this is crazy. Like this is really what we want, because we want to get directly into the ion channels, which is what makes cells move and operate. So yeah, I firmly believe that product is life-changing and will help anyone, really.
Right. So it's a liquid ionized form of magnesium.
Correct. And it's called Remag. And then she has a Remite, which is a 12 electrolyte formula. So it has all the different electrolytes that you need. And, you know, going off of your conversation with Brian, you know, he's talking about how the oxygen affects the fascia connection and how that operates throughout the body. But that electromagnetic signaling that goes through our system is regulated through electrolytes, okay, through minerals. That's what they are. They're conductors. They're actual, like, I like to keep this around. This is a piece of copper, right? And this is a electrolyte that you can consume, and that helps conduct electricity in your body. So as much as oxygen helps keep things pumping, you need to have mineral conductors to let the electromagnetic signal actually spark through your nerves and get things firing. So the Remite is another freaking powerhouse. I mean, for a while as an athlete, I wouldn't share this with people because I wasn't affiliated with them. So it was like my little cutting edge stuff that kind of gives me that edge. But now that I'm an actual affiliate for last year and sell the products, I have no problem sharing it. But for a while, I was like, there's no way I'm telling anyone in the jiu-jitsu community about this stuff. No way. And then the thing is now my buddies that I'm like, I appreciate them as an athlete, and we're on the same tournament circuit, essentially. I got these guys drinking it, and they love it. They love it. So, and guess what? They're winning. And yeah, so you have the right fuel. That's why I'm not big on what, like, types of foods. Like I listened a little bit about the fruitarian stuff and whatever. Carnivore. I call myself a carnivore sweet tooth. You know, I've been doing. I lived on a huge bee farm. You know, hundreds and hundreds of boxes of bees, and for the shoulder, bee sting therapy. Taking the bee venom directly on the injury gives yourself that analgesic effect. You create inflammation from the venom, and then your body creates cortisol as a anti-inflammatory for that venom. So, dude, 16 stings on that shoulder where I had that AC separation, huge improvement. Okay,
that's wild.
But the guy that I was living with was telling me all about the benefits of eating honey and the propolis and the bee pollen, and that the bee box is a medicine cabinet in itself. And there's a book about that, and you can heal with the bees, and beekeepers don't have arthritis because they're constantly being stung and blah, 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 blah. So when I already had that information and then got into the carnivore stuff, I was like, dude, I can't stop eating this honey because I also keep bees myself. So I was like, okay, I harvest my own honey. You got to eat the raw honey. It's delicious. And then obviously the information with the carnivore stuff kind of makes sense to me, but that's, my own take on it. But with the minerals, all that stuff doesn't really matter because you're getting the mineral ions from a stabilized form. That's why you get the nutrition in the first place. So I like to eat food. So I don't stop eating, but I don't care about what food I choose to eat because I know based on my supplementation with these minerals that I am getting what I need and I'm performing like I'm getting it. So there's definitely some validity to making sure you have the right nutrition and your body should perform when it does. So the mineral ions, like when people start looking, that's why you take food is for the ions. So once you start learning about mineral ions, that will really open your mind to what nutrition's about.
That's interesting stuff. Especially the bee stings. That blows my mind. I might next time I get an injury, might go out in the forest here and provoke some bees.
One little caveat about that. I hurt my thumb in jiu-jitsu and I put the bee sting right on the injury. Don't do that. Do it near the injury and allow the venom to kind of saturate the area, but do not put a bee sting directly on an injury because I promise you it will really, really hurt. So don't do that because I learned the hard way. But other than that, bee stings around an area that is problematic, and I'm promising you'll be surprised how well it feels after.
That's amazing. So I wanted to pivot back to like a little bit of the mechanics and your personal cueing or a movement or a exercise that you found to really help you out with your internal cueing. Or I'll give you an example. I go out, I feel the bottom of my feet as I walk. I do that for up to an hour, and by the time I finish, I'm thinking differently than I did when I started. Is there anything like that in your world? Anything along those lines?
Yeah, just a lot of the standard stuff from GOATA, feet straight, second toe straight, walking on the green dot, outside edge, really feeling that bony edge of the foot and fourth and fifth metatarsal area. Those to me have been like crucial for me to really just change the way I move. I came in to the assessment WOTA. I had feet out, ankle bones low, front chain dominant for sure, based on all the lifting. I have like 10 years of conventional lifting, right? Hip thrust, kettlebell swings, sandbags, everything. So, it was front chain dominant because you're just pushing those hips forward. And so for me, just getting those hips back, and yeah, feeling that green dot has been life-changing. So for me, if I go on a long walk, I'm just constantly focused on that outside edge and heel away on that step and just really flowing into that bow, that landing, and then just trying to release. Those are just basic cues. I think what's really helpful with GOATA is just how simple it can be. Once you really kind of understand the framework, that it's not supposed to be complicated. It's really not that complicated. I think people want to make things complicated. And yeah, so for me, it's all about just feeling that outside edge and how much stronger that makes you feel. For me, like every time I've put weight in that outside edge and create that arching of the foot, like I was telling Eric that I felt like I had hooves. As I was going through my recode, I felt like my feet were becoming like hooves. They were really like hard, and I can create more impact or transfer of energy because my foot was becoming more rigid. And I think that that's really a selling point for what GOATA is doing is it's making that foot feel more rigid, and that allows for a stronger transfer of energy than something that's going to get soft and flatten out. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%. What about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is WOTA?
There's times where you're trying to pass the guard and you're on your knees, right? And when you're on your knees, your feet end up turning out because you end up finding yourself pushing through that big toe as you're really driving into that body. And I've been looking at a lot of film of other people playing jujitsu, and it just seems like for leverages in certain positions, like you just get stuck with your big toe being the pushing part on the movement versus like rolling it out to that outside edge and like in the corner, like cornering that knee through and then pushing on that fourth and fifth. Is it possible? Uh, I'm still trying to figure that out. You know, I'm still recoding myself, and I don't know. Maybe the more GOATA I get, the more I'll see it in my actual live grappling. But there are just some positions that you're on your big toe and you're just driving out on those big toes, staying low to the ground. Um, yeah, and then as far as when you're on your back playing guard, your hips are in front of your ribs normally. So you have your hips tucked up underneath you, and you're playing this position on your back, and that's totally a WOTA position of laying in your front chain, just chilling on your back. And I like to play on my back. You know, that's where I feel comfortable. So, you know, for me, I have to do due diligence to get back into my back chain and make sure that I'm going heels away too. And then on top of that, when you see me now, just like walking when the fight's over, you know, my feet just have the tendency to come in together in their columns. So it's pretty cool to see that, like, even after fighting and I'm not even thinking about anything other than like I won or I lost, that my feet are just getting right up into my columns and toes are straight. So it's cool to see that it's actually like the recode is happening.
And how long did that take for you to get to the point where it was subconscious, even after having these, quote, suboptimal inputs from fighting? How much nervous system recoding in terms of good locomotive behaviors did you have to do to get to that subconscious place?
I mean, it could be at least 8 months or more. You know, like to me, I feel like I've done so much of the other way with weight training and lifting engine that like I was telling Eric, I was like, dude, this is gonna take me a while on my recode, because I just felt it. Like I feel it in the nervous system, like in my brain, like as I'm doing the rockers even and just shifting my weight side to side into those hip capsules. It's just like, just the release of that tension of thrusting hips forward. Yeah, I mean, I'm at a year and a quarter on my recode, and I'm really starting to see some nice changes now that like I knew it's probably gonna take me 2 years because I started lifting at 12 and I put in hard. I mean, dude, like I blew up. I was 220, just whoa. And the thing is like, dude, all that for back pain, right? And then once I got into it's crazy. It's crazy. You know, it's all about the aesthetics, trying to be jacked and so shallow. And I remember going to a course and they're like, what do you want to be known for? Helping people or for your six-pack abs? And I was like, cool. Like, that's it. Like, I'm not interested in people being aware, oh, wow, look at the six-pack. No, I want to be known for helping people feel better and moving better. So that was like a real like dagger to the heart of like my narcissism and shallowness. It was like, okay, like that's done. Let's move on to helping people. So yeah, that pattern of lifting is deep, and I know that like if I just keep working on the right inputs of back chain dominance, inside ankle bone high. I just posted a video of this woman walking on bottle caps, and she's balancing on beer bottles. And as she's walking on the bottles, she's landing on the green dot. She's just putting her foot nice and easy on the bottle, this little Asian woman. And then her back foot, as she's stepping off the bottle on the green dot, here goes away. And I was like, perfect video. I haven't seen anything more definitive as far as what you would use for balancing. And like, there was just this talk with David Weck talking about big toe. And I DM'd my friend and I said, listen, I wonder if she would be able to do it on her big toe. So it's like, she was the defining moment of what is the best way. And yeah, I'm just trying to live that out now.
So let's talk about the benefits of cold immersion, because you have your cryo club, you're still doing Wim Hof Method. So you're teaching people the breath work, but then you also every other week are getting in, doing cold immersion. How long do you do that for? What are the benefits of cold immersion, both either on your mental state and your mental control and your physiology? And how can a person start getting into that without overshooting it too hard and potentially having some health risks?
Great question. Great question. So it's important for the listeners, like anyone that's interested in doing the Wim Hof method, you should ask your health practitioner first as far as cardiovascular health goes. But women that are pregnant or people that are suffering from epilepsy, this method might not be for you. It might be a little too stressful for your body and could be detrimental. So, make sure you consult with someone before you actually get into the Wim Hof method. But as far as the benefits that go along with cold training, right away you're going to get anti-inflammatory response in your body. Combining the breath work with the cold exposure magnifies those results. Doing Wim Hof breathing alone can release the norepinephrine, and that norepinephrine is anti-inflammatory and also helps produce the anti-inflammatory marker IL-10. So through the breath work, you can get those anti-inflammatory results. Combining that with the cold exposure magnifies the anti-inflammatory effects and removal of those pro-inflammatory markers, IL-6, IL-8, TNF. All those things get lowered when you combine cold and breathwork together. Now, the other benefit that goes along with the cold exposure is the skill of de-escalation from stress. Okay, that is, I think, one of the most powerful things about the method is that when you get into extreme cold, and we're talking like 55 and below, 55 is not that extreme, but when you get into the low 40s and 30s, and you're getting to that level of extreme cold. So your body doesn't really know the difference between life or death, or it does know the difference of life or death, but it's so cold that your body immediately just thinks it's in a death state. It doesn't know that it's not going to die. You're going to be able to get out and survive. But once you hit that water, your body's like, I am dying. I need to get out. And so when your body has that reaction, it starts releasing that adrenaline. And that adrenaline is going to make your body freak out. Your breath is going to go up, your breath rate, shortness of breath. You're going to release the glucose into your system. It's going to increase the heart rate. All that's going to happen in the same moment that you hit that water. So that gives you the opportunity to consciously choose to slow down your respiratory rate, slow your heart rate, and control your mindset about accomplishing the task of the cold. That is a skill, okay? So when you're in that cold and you can slow your breath rate down, you're going to change your heart rate, and then you're going to change your mindset. That's that interoception that I was telling you about. When you hit the cold, your interoception saying, I'm dying, I need to get out. This is intense. So if you can go over that, override that initial response and say, I'm okay, I'm not going to die, I can do this, I'm going to accomplish this. That mindset is so different from I can't, I got to get out, it hurts, I can't. And that response is not going to be beneficial long term, right? So if you can reframe your mind and say, oh, I'm okay, I'm going to get out of this, I'm going to be fine. That's so empowering. And then when you actually get out, that skill of de-escalating, because after that first minute, you will regulate. Your body will be like, you're too cold, the adrenaline's already saturated your system, your mind's already like, ready, like I can take this on, it's no problem. So after that next minute, you're cooling it down, you get out, boom, you're a new person. And that is the real benefit for the mindset, is you've de-escalated from like the highest possible stress signal you could create artificially without dying, and safely get out. Because if you get in a car accident, you're going to have a high level intense stress response too, or something. But we don't want to get in car accidents, right? So the ice bath is a safe environment for you to simulate that death signal and get out and have no problems. So the Wim Hof method is awesome. It's anti-inflammatory. It's going to strengthen the cardiovascular system. So this is really cool too. Your veins and arteries are packed with soft muscle that's going to help push blood through your system. When you get into the cold, you're going to get that vasoconstriction, which is going to concentrically constrict those muscles. Then when you get out and you start to warm up, you're going to get that eccentric lengthening of those muscles inside the circulatory system, vasodilation, right? So you're getting this opportunity to actually strengthen the musculature of the circulatory system, which long term of that lowers heart rate, lowers blood pressure. So you get all these cool benefits from cold training and breath work.
What about, because you mentioned you did sauna work as well. What about hot therapy? So personally, I take hot baths. I've been experimenting with that. Very, very hot. And I get the same type of thing. Get out of this bath or you're going to cook. And I just breathe through it. I don't do the Wim Hof breaths. I do more, Brian style oxygen advantage where I'm trying to relax with it. Do you have any experience with that? Does it provide the same benefit?
As far as, I haven't had any experience with a hot bath like you're describing, but the sauna work, sauna, you create heat shock proteins that are going to help rebuild the broken proteins in your body. You get more blood flow. I think you release human growth hormone when you get into the extreme heat for a certain amount of time. I think you can also cook certain viruses and stuff like that in your body too. So it's heat is awesome. It's like, for me, with what I was describing as the Pelton plan, I have a category of stress. And in stress, you're going to manage that through your breath, right? How you're dealing with stress is really a relationship of your breath and how that is, affecting you. It's like the mirror, right? How you breathe is a reflection of how you are internally. Okay, so hot and cold, those are two different spectrums of temperature, but it's all stress. You have cold exposure stress and you have heat exposure stress. It's all stress. Supposedly the cold has cold shock proteins that have the same kind of capacity as the heat shock proteins, which the way it was described to me is it's like a baby seat in a car where that goes around the baby and protects the baby. So these shock proteins go around broken proteins in the body and start to fold them back into the proper shapes. So as far as breathwork goes in sauna, just regulating slow exhalation, trying to get into that relaxed parasympathetic state, exhale longer than you inhale. The more you increase your breath rate, the more you increase your heart rate, which increases blood flow, and that's going to make you feel warmer. So as far as doing it in the sauna, because I have the zipper one, so I feel like I'm cheating a little bit because my head feels cooler in the AC than it does in the freaking sauna. But obviously, when you're in the sauna, I've had another instructor teach me about like breathing in through the tongue like this, and it allows the air to hit the moisture on your tongue and cool it. And so you can feel like it's a little bit cooler coming in through that tongue than if you were just breathing in with a big mouth open. So there's all these little tricks that you can do for that. But yeah, the hot is awesome. And I think for me, it's more of a mental training. I was going right from jujitsu 2 hours and then just being like, yeah, let's get in this sauna and tough it out for 30 minutes. And more of a mental edge and cardiovascular conditioning than anything.
That's huge. When you're coaching clients, so you said the stress management is one part of your coaching. What is the Pelton plan? How do you approach working with clients, and what elements of like personal development do you try to approach with everyone?
Yeah, I think it's like lifestyle medicine, right? Functional medicine. It's the idea of looking at the whole lifestyle of the individual and how they approach that. And so for me, I've been trying to simplify it. And, if you look at your motion, your stress, your mindset, and your sustenance, these four pillars, you can say, are four directions of things. These are four categories that hold a lot of information. And so like for motion, when I do my clients, I'm obviously doing an assessment with them through the slow motion. They come to me, I ask them what they're looking for, and I say, look, we're going to have to start with a video assessment. I film them, I sit down with them, and we go through the video, and I show them exactly what's wrong with them. Why are they suffering with what they're suffering? Then as far as that's under the motion, right? And then we're going to go into the GOATA movement patterns. And then for stress management or stress, we're going to look at their breath. And part of the evaluation I conduct is your breathing pattern. How are you breathing? Are you capable of accessing your diaphragm? Like for me, I at one point didn't know what my diaphragm was or how to breathe deep. And so I believe that a lot of people are suffering from that same inability of lack of proprioception of their breath, their respiratory muscles, and how they can improve that. So of course I evaluate the breathing pattern. All my sessions with my clients start with 5 minutes of breath work. Mandatory, because it's important to allow them to downregulate from whatever they're just coming from work or they're going to work. They need to relax. So I use it to assess their breathing, assess their internal state, give them some CO2 conditioning so that they're building that tolerance to the CO2. And then we go into our rockers and our groundwork. Everyone starts on the ground. Dr. William was talking to me about the DNS stuff. One of the education programs that I went through is developmental kinesiology with DNS, dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. And their whole program is based off of the whole development of a baby from birth to walking. And in those patterns, they're all on the ground. And so to me, when I learned about that, and then I heard about GOATA and what they're doing with the developmental groundwork stuff, to me, it made a lot of sense. So with my clients, we start on the ground and we make sure that they're working through their developmental sequences, their crawling patterns. And then we obviously get upright and start working into our gait mechanics and GOATA patterns. And as far as sustenance go, as a third piece of that puzzle, that's where I bring up the nutritional stuff and the importance of minerals and ions and making sure that you're feeding yourself properly. I'm also, interested in the organ meat stuff. I eat a lot of organ meat. And then on the mindset, which is the last key, I think the important part when I work with my clients is empowering them to really take responsibility of their life. Empowering them to realize that they are a powerful creator with their entire life. I'm big on manifestation. I'm big on mindset, like the thoughts you put in your head, like the verbalizing the things that you want and then watching them come into your life. The synchronicities of things that you're thinking or saying, looking for those confirmation biases. Like to me, I use very specific ones. Like I always get green lights. I always get parking up front. Money flows freely and easily to me now. When those things happen, I take a moment to kind of compound that bias. And I'm like, oh, look, another green light. Look at this green light. This is perfect. And so I really want people to understand that like you can use those biases to your benefit and really kind of amplify your life in those magical, powerful ways that all starts with your mind, right? All starts with what you're believing and your own capabilities and how powerful you really are as an individual. So, I try to look at it as like a whole piece, right? You have to have your movement, you have to have your food, your sustenance, you have to have your mindset, and then you also have to have a balance of stress management, right? And that's really the breath, right? Is understanding your reflection of how you deal with it. And that could be a stressful relationship with someone. Like if you're not able to breathe through a conversation, you can see someone get all tense and their face get flushed and their body language will really express what's going on internally, but also their breath. So, teaching them that they can downregulate emotional stress with their breath is also part of what I'm doing. So I approach each individual as an individual, but the system's the same, which is that, you need to make sure you're feeding yourself. You need to make sure you're moving yourself correctly. You need to make sure you have the right mindset. And then, of course, you need to make sure you're breathing correctly. And then using different stresses, hot, cold, even, sunlight, making sure your circadian rhythm is aligned with the light cycle. And, obviously you can get into the EMF stuff and like disconnecting from those non-native EMFs so that you're not affecting your mitochondria. But, like Dr. Dean with the minerals, she doesn't really let that stuff bother her, because if her mitochondria are being fed correctly with these electromagnetic ions, I think, if I'm not mistaken, some of the discussion about people's deficiencies can even be related to that EMF signal disrupting these ion channels, being able to bring things in and out of cells. So it's more of the electromagnetic signals that are disrupting our ability to uptake nutrition, plus not even getting enough nutrition naturally. Like, unfortunately, the soil has been so ruined. Like, Living Wet Farms is all about regenerative, biodynamic farming, and using the cows to put more fertilizer into the ground, and then plant seeds for the grass, and then do regenerative grass growing with the cows. I mean, it's amazing what they're doing with the earth. And so when you have these people that want to like poo-poo farmers that are using the right techniques to benefit the earth, I get a little frustrated myself, because I'm like, just go look at how they're farming. Look how they're treating the land. Look how I was on this farm, and the farm before was used for container trees, meaning they were selling trees in pots for landscaping, like decorating yards. Okay. They would spray those crops with weed killer and fertilizers that literally killed the ground below those potted trees and made it into sand, because Florida is mostly sand in places. And so I watched this guy infuse the ground with charcoal, which is carbon, which has like a 6,000 year lifespan. So once you put the charcoal back into the soil, it's never going to leave. And he turned this sand into black, rich soil in like a year by allowing the cows to go over it and pee and poop. And then they put the seeds for the grass in that. And the seeds, when the roots go into the ground, they release sugars. And the sugars feed the bacteria and the fungus in the ground. And that creates more life and more life. And then it's just a big cycle. So everything is connected. And even our body, like, I imagine our body as like a tree, and you have your root. Your brain is like I don't know if you're familiar with medicinal mushrooms, but like some of these mushrooms kind of look funky, like maybe a brain would. And then they have these roots that come off of white mycelia, and that could be our nerves. Our nerves are these white cords that somehow are just tethered into this thingy. And then the funny part is you have an extraction point on the compost pile in your gut, right? You eat all this crap, and the composting is going on in your gut, and then it turns into like a clay, and then your veins and stuff are sucking out all that nutrients and then feeding it up into the nerves and feeding it around the body. It's a beautiful thing when you look at the whole body as like its own system. So yeah, I don't know how I got on that tangent. Sorry.
No, I love it. That's actually one of the reasons that I ended up switching from a vegan diet something like 5 or 6 years ago, was realizing, well, first of all, I got really sick eating it, but then I also studied regenerative agriculture because I was very concerned with my ecological impact through my diet. And I read books like Folks This Ain't Normal by Joel Salatin, and one book about the soil, specifically Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown, talks about that whole process of being able to reverse symptoms of desertification in different lands and make fertile soil using livestock. And it's these places that you would never be able to actually grow crops to eat, because you just can't grow anything on it. But you put a bunch of livestock in there, throw some grass seed, and then all of a sudden you have like a self-sustaining ecosystem or a self-contained ecosystem that regenerates soil. And what most people don't understand is most carbon atmospherically isn't sequestered by trees. It's sequestered by good, rich, biodiverse soil. And so when you regenerate soil, that's why White Oak Pastures is a farm that's kind of notorious in the carnivore community, because it's a carbon sink business, right? Like, it's not carbon neutral.
They're sequestering
it
carbon
sequesters more carbon than it produces in producing and shipping and butchering the meat. It literally has a negative carbon footprint, right? And so most people don't understand that soil health is one of the most important factors in our ecological well-being on the planet. And so obviously livestock is a huge part of that. I'm very, very, very passionate about that. I've wrote articles about that and stuff. It's something that on the side I've talked about at length. besides biomechanics?
Super. Yeah, well, Living Web Farms, you got to check them out because they are filming their high density grazing cattle
Hmm.
that they plant this beautiful multi-species grasses and then allow the cow to come into like a feeding lot that's done by electrical wire. So they'll pull the wire to this designated size lot and they'll rush in there because I feel like they're like bodybuilders on like a timed diet. So they're like starving to get into this next lot. And dude, they're freaking munching down on the grass. They'll cut it down to the bottom of the ground and then they'll just let them sit in there for a little bit. They'll get hungry again and then they pull up in the next lot and they rush in there. And it's so cool to see because they're stuck in that like high density grazing, they're able to push in the fertilizer and stuff into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Then they come back behind them with a tractor laying seed. And then you just keep rotating the entire farm ranch with that cycle, and the soil underneath it just is loving it, loving it. So it's super powerful to see that stuff.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, that's like holistic management, high density grazing, like that Alan Savory first talked about way back in the day. So Ben, thanks so much for hopping on here and talking with us. If people want to find out more about your work, what are your favorite places to send people? What's the best place to find you online?
Right now, it's Instagram. You can go to Ben Pelton Plan at Instagram, and then eventually I'm going to have the peltonplan.com up and running, and you'll be able to find pre-recorded breath work and go-to workouts and everything in between. So it'll be a great spot. But Instagram right now, reach out, DM me, available.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation today. This is the Art of Move podcast. If you're listening to us on Spotify or iTunes, please leave us a rating and review. If you're listening on YouTube, please subscribe. And if you're listening on No Filter, well, thanks for being on No Filter Net. We'll catch you next time for the Art of Move. Ben, thanks again for chatting. This was really, really fun to talk, and I'd love to talk to you more and more in depth about each one of those topics, really. I feel like when we first talked to someone,
we
it's
kind
like,
of jumped around everywhere.
There's so many
great
cool
stuff.
ideas. And we'd love to have you back on to go more in depth on any and all of those at some point.
Cool. Love to hear from you guys again. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, my pleasure. We'll catch you next time, guys, on The Art of Move.
Have a good one, guys.